Imagine a time when an entire nation was pushed to its limits. A time when kings lost their kingdoms, farmers lost their lands, artisans lost their livelihoods, and soldiers lost their dignity. But on one historic day, the anger that had been building for years finally exploded into a massive rebellion against British rule. This was not just a revolt. It was the first great challenge to the British Empire in India. It was the First War of Indian Independence, 1857. The First War of Indian Independence, also known as the Revolt of 1857, was the largest and most widespread uprising against British rule in India before the 20th century. The revolt began on May 10, 1857 at Meerut, a major military cantonment under British control. What started as a rebellion among Indian soldiers soon spread across large parts of northern and central India, shaking the foundations of British power. Cities and regions such as Delhi, Kanpur, Lucknow, Jhansi, and Awadh became important centers of resistance. Although the revolt was eventually suppressed by the British, it marked a turning point in Indian history and inspired future generations in the struggle for freedom. But what forced thousands of Indians to rise against one of the most powerful empires in the world? To understand this, we must first look at the political and economic conditions that existed before 1857. One of the most important political causes of the revolt was the aggressive expansion policy followed by the British East India Company. The man largely responsible for this policy was Lord Dalhousie, who served as the Governor-General of India from 1848 to 1856. Lord Dalhousie believed that British territories in India should continuously expand. To achieve this objective, he introduced a controversial policy known as the Doctrine of Lapse. According to the Doctrine of Lapse, if a ruler of a princely state died without a natural male heir, the British would refuse to recognize an adopted heir and would annex that kingdom into their territory. This policy directly threatened the sovereignty of Indian rulers and created widespread resentment. Using this doctrine, the British annexed several states, including Satara, Sambalpur, Nagpur, and Jhansi. Many Indian rulers viewed this policy as unfair and a direct attack on their traditional rights. Another major political event that intensified public anger was the Annexation of Awadh, also known as Awadh, in 1856. Unlike other annexations, Awadh was not annexed under the Doctrine of Lapse. Instead, the British accused its ruler of misgovernment and took control of the province. The annexation of Awadh shocked Indians because Awadh had been one of the most prosperous and loyal states under British influence. Thousands of nobles, soldiers, landowners, and officials lost their positions and privileges after the annexation. This created deep dissatisfaction among the people and became one of the major causes behind the revolt. As British control expanded, many Indians began to feel that their traditional political systems, rulers, and institutions were being systematically destroyed. Along with political grievances, economic exploitation also played a crucial role in creating widespread anger against British rule. The British introduced revenue systems that placed a heavy burden on Indian farmers. Their primary objective was to maximize revenue collection rather than improve agricultural conditions. One such system was the Ryotwari system, implemented mainly in parts of southern and western India. Under this system, farmers had to pay taxes directly to the government. The tax rates were often extremely high, and farmers were required to pay even during poor harvests. As a result, many peasants fell into debt and lost their land. Another system was the Mahalwari system, which was prevalent in parts of northern India. Under this arrangement, taxes were collected from entire villages or groups of landholders. Since revenue demands were frequently excessive, villagers struggled to meet these obligations, leading to financial hardship and increasing resentment against British authorities. The condition of Indian artisans and craftsmen was equally distressing. Before British rule, India was famous for its handwoven textiles, handicrafts, metalwork, and other traditional industries. Indian products were admired and traded across the world. However, with the Industrial Revolution in Britain, machine-made goods began flooding Indian markets. British policies favored imported manufactured products while discouraging local industries. As a result, Indian handicrafts could not compete with cheaper machine-made goods produced in British factories. Thousands of weavers, craftsmen, and artisans lost their livelihoods. Entire communities that had depended on traditional industries for generations were pushed into poverty. Unemployment increased rapidly, and economic suffering spread throughout the country. Thus, by the middle of the 19th century, political annexations, heavy taxation, and economic exploitation had created widespread dissatisfaction among rulers, farmers, artisans, and common people. India was becoming a land filled with frustration and anger, waiting for a spark that would ignite a massive rebellion. And soon, that spark would arrive. Apart from political and economic grievances, social and religious concerns also contributed significantly to the growing resentment against British rule. During the 19th century, the British introduced several social reforms in India. Some of these reforms were intended to improve society. For example, the practice of sati, in which a widow was forced to sacrifice herself on her husband's funeral pyre, was abolished. The British also supported the Widow Remarriage Act, which allowed Hindu widows to remarry. While these reforms may have had positive intentions, many Indians viewed them with suspicion. People feared that the British government was interfering in their traditional customs, religious beliefs, and social practices. Rumors began spreading that the British wanted to convert Indians to Christianity and destroy their religious identities. As a result, even those who were not directly affected by British policies began to distrust the colonial government. This growing fear and suspicion created an atmosphere of tension throughout the country. The Indian soldiers, known as sepoys, formed the backbone of the British East India Company's army. Ironically, it was these very soldiers who would eventually launch the revolt. Indian soldiers faced several forms of discrimination within the army. They received lower salaries compared to their British counterparts, despite performing similar duties and fighting in the same battles. Promotion opportunities were also extremely limited. Higher-ranking positions were generally reserved for British officers, regardless of the abilities or experience of Indian soldiers. This created feelings of frustration and humiliation among the sepoys. Many Indian soldiers were also unhappy with certain military regulations that they believed violated their religious beliefs and traditions. Over time, dissatisfaction within the army continued to grow, turning the sepoys into a powerful force of resistance against British rule. Although many political, economic, social, and military factors had created widespread anger, the immediate spark for the revolt came from a new weapon introduced by the British Army, the Enfield rifle. To load the rifle, soldiers had to bite open paper cartridges before inserting them into the weapon. Rumors quickly spread that these cartridges were greased with the fat of cows and pigs. For Hindus, the cow was considered sacred, while for Muslims, the pig was regarded as unclean. Therefore, using such cartridges was seen as an insult to the religious beliefs of both communities. The British authorities attempted to dismiss these concerns, but by then the damage had already been done. Many soldiers believed that the British were deliberately trying to undermine their religion. This controversy became the final spark that ignited years of accumulated anger and frustration.